Thank you, Barbara. And Bruce Klingner joining us now from Washington to talk more about this. He is a senior research fellow for Northeast Asia at the Heritage Foundation's Asian Studies Center. Bruce, welcome to the program. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
I want to first get your take on the National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster's comments there, where he sees North Korea as, quote, a much more immediate threat. How do you take those comments? I mean, it sounds like this is a turning point for the Trump administration's North Korea policy.
Well, right now, it's uncertain what's driving his comments. Is it intelligence indications of an imminent nuclear test or a long-range, perhaps ICBM test, or is it really just part of the long run-up to perhaps this week's summit with the South Korean president, where both sides are talking about their resolve to deal with the North Korean threat? Also, we've seen recent reports that the Trump administration is, I think, belatedly realizing that China will not be helpful in pressuring North Korea, so that we may see the U.S. imposing secondary sanctions on Chinese violators of U.S. law.
Also, Barbara Starr reporting that the Pentagon has updated possible military actions that the president could take a look at against North Korea. But when we talk about the consequences of a military action, as Barbara Starr was saying, I mean, that could be disastrous, especially for the peninsula, if North Korea retaliates against South Korea.
Exactly. But the Trump administration has been sending conflicting signals on its views towards what would be called a preventative attack, an attack to prevent North Korea from completing its development of an ICBM. My discussion with Trump officials indicated that that kind of attack, which is different from preemptive attack, where you feel like you are about to be attacked, is really off the table. And yet we saw very strong signals in April when tensions were high. There were statements by senior officials of the attack on Syria was a signal to North Korea, and then they walked back that very harsh rhetoric, and my subsequent discussion with officials indicated that they realized that the April comments were a bit over the top. So this is again swinging back in that direction.
Yeah, it's like the age-old question, how in the world does the world deal with North Korea? And you were part of a group of delegates, I believe you wrote about this last week in the Washington Post. You and the group of delegates met with North Korean representatives in Sweden, and from this piece that you wrote, it seems like you walked away with the knowledge that North Korea has this unwavering determination to become a nuclear state before even considering any kind of negotiation, because you were there to see if there was any appetite to revive the six-party talks. Tell us about that trip, and if North Korea is so determined to become a nuclear state, what is the U.S. to do?
The North Korean delegation was very emphatic that denuclearization is totally off the table. There's absolutely nothing the U.S. or South Korea can offer to induce them to abandon their nuclear arsenal. We tried various options, offering different things or suggesting different options, and they even became irritated, just sort of stop trying to do this. You know, as they said, accept us as a nuclear state, then they're either prepared to talk about a peace treaty or fight. And they, were very emphatic. There was no signals of flexibility or intent to denuclearize. So, we really walked away from that quite convinced that they really are not interested in negotiating, not interested in returning to the six-party talks for the main objective, which is to denuclearize North Korea.
So what's the pragmatic option here? I mean, clearly China, U.S. has been leaning on China for years, and China is only willing to go so far. They don't want North Korea's regime to collapse because that will work against China's interests. But also you have the South Korean President Moon Jae-in, who has taken a much softer approach to North Korea, wants dialogue. What is the practical option?
Well, after last year's nuclear test, 2 nuclear tests by North Korea, there was really a new international consensus and resolve to increase pressure on North Korea for its repeated violations. So we not only had stronger UN resolutions, but the U.S. Congress was trying to push President Obama to more fully use the existing authorities he had to more fully implement and enforce U.S. law. But the U.S. Has been continuing to pull its punches on sanctions. There's actually much more we can do. So far, the Trump administration has not distinguished its policy from that of President Obama, but we may be seeing the preview of more sanctions on North Korean entities, as well as secondary sanctions on Chinese violators of U.S. law. So the targeted financial measures are really premised on the centrality of the U.S. dollar to international financial transactions. North Korea, the majority of its international transactions are denominated in dollars, which means they have to go through U.S. banks. That actually gives the U.S. Treasury Department a great deal of leverage that we haven't been using. Also, we can use it against Chinese entities that are interacting with North Korea.
And these secondary sanctions you speak of on Chinese companies that do business with North Korea is something that the White House continues to consider. Bruce Klingner, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.